Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing legacies recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozark Hills. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know in which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach you across the world. The year was 1871, an eerie time when the rugged, mist-shrouded Ozark Hills of Missouri stretched like a primordial veil across the landscape, creating a frontier realm of untamed wilderness where whispered legends took root in the rocky soil and grew into something far more sinister than mere folklore. This was a land that had only recently emerged from the chaos of the Civil War, where isolated homesteaders carved their existence from unforgiving terrain, and where the boundary between civilization and the ancient forces that dwelt in the deep places of the earth remained as thin as morning mist. Railroad construction had begun penetrating the southern Missouri wilderness, bringing with it the promise of progress. But in the most remote hollows and ridges, families like the Gowrows maintained their secretive existence far from the reach of law or civilization, practicing customs that harked back to older, darker traditions. Picture, if you will, a modern cryptid hunter hiking through the overgrown paths of the Missouri wilderness, his metal detector suddenly erupting with signals as he discovers fragments of rusted iron chains, unusual bone formations, and carved stone tablets bearing symbols that predate any known European settlement in the region. These relics, scattered throughout what local maps still mark as the Gowrow territory, hint at experiments that violated the natural order breeding programs that produced creatures whose very existence challenged everything scientists thought they knew about the possibilities and limitations of biological manipulation. But to understand how such horrors came to inhabit these hills, we must journey back to 1871, when Ezekiel Gowrow first established his clan's dominion over a stretch of wilderness that would become synonymous with monsters. The Gowrow family represented the most extreme manifestation of the reclusive hill folk who populated the Missouri Ozarks during the post-Civil War era. Individuals who had fled from mainstream society to establish their own kingdoms in the untamed frontier, where no questions were asked and no authorities dared to venture. Ezekiel Gowrow himself was a figure drawn from the darkest aspects of American folklore, a patriarch whose iron-fisted rule over his clan was matched only by his consuming ambition to acquire power through methods that civilized society would never tolerate. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders like an oak trunk, and eyes that burned with the fervor of someone who believed himself chosen for a destiny beyond ordinary human limitations, Ezekiel commanded absolute obedience from his extended family, through a combination of physical intimidation and arcane knowledge passed down through generations of outcasts and wanderers. The Gowrow homestead occupied a strategic position in the heart of the wildest region of the Ozark Hills, accessible only by treacherous mountain paths that discouraged casual visitors and provided numerous opportunities for ambush should unwelcome guests somehow find their way to the clan's domain. The main house, constructed from massive logs and stones quarried from the surrounding cliffs, squatted on a natural terrace that commanded sweeping views of the valleys below, while remaining largely concealed from observation by anyone traveling through the area. Outbuildings scattered across the property included workshops where the family pursued their various trades, storage facilities for the moonshine that provided their primary source of income, and structures whose purposes would not become clear until much later, when investigators would discover their true function in the clan's darker activities. Family dynamics within the Gowrow household followed patterns that would have been considered disturbing even by the rough standards of frontier society. with Ezekiel exercising absolute authority over his wife, 7 children, and numerous cousins and distant relatives who had gathered under his protection over the years. The patriarch demanded not only obedience, but participation in activities that blended elements of folk religion, primitive science, and practices that seemed to draw from traditions far older than anything associated with European settlement of the Americas. Children were raised from birth to understand that their family was different from others, chosen for purposes that required secrecy and sacrifice, and that their ultimate loyalty belonged not to any earthly authority, but to forces that dwelt in the deepest places of the earth and demanded payment in forms that civilized minds preferred not to contemplate. The clan's isolation was both physical and cultural, as they maintained customs and beliefs that set them apart from even their most eccentric neighbors in the broader Ozark community. While other hill families might engage in moonshining or occasional feuding with rival clans, the Gowrows practiced rituals that involved the manipulation of natural forces in ways that seemed to violate fundamental laws of biology and physics. Ezekiel had inherited from his own ancestors a collection of writings and artifacts that hinted at knowledge possessed by pre-Columbian inhabitants of the region, techniques for influencing the development of living creatures that went far beyond conventional animal husbandry into realms that modern science would classify as impossible. The turning point in the clan's history came during the summer of 1871, when Ezekiel's exploration of his property led him to the discovery of a network of ancient caves that had been sealed by previous inhabitants using methods that suggested both urgency and terror. These caverns, apparently carved by Native American peoples who had vanished from the region centuries before European contact, contained fossils of creatures that had never been catalogued by any naturalist, along with deposits of minerals that seemed to glow with their own internal light and exhibited properties that defied conventional understanding of chemistry and geology. Most significantly, the caves bore evidence of having been used for purposes that combined elements of religious ceremony with what could only be described as primitive laboratory experimentation. The fossils embedded in the cave walls depicted creatures that appeared to be hybrids of familiar animals, combining features of bears and wolves with reptilian characteristics that suggested some form of deliberate manipulation rather than natural evolution. Ezekiel, whose education had been unconventional but extensive, recognized these remains as evidence that his ancestral techniques for influencing biological development were not merely theoretical, but had been successfully implemented by previous practitioners. The glowing minerals, which he identified through consultation with his inherited texts as substances that could accelerate and direct evolutionary processes, provided the missing components he needed to transform his experiments from mere folklore into practical applications. Working with primitive but effective equipment constructed according to specifications found in his ancestral documents, Ezekiel began conducting initial experiments using local wildlife captured from the surrounding forests and streams. These early attempts involved exposing pregnant animals to calculated doses of the luminous minerals while subjecting them to ritual procedures designed to influence the development of their offspring. The results exceeded even his most optimistic expectations, producing creatures that combined the physical characteristics of their parents with enhanced size, intelligence, and aggressive capabilities that made them formidable guardians for the clan's illegal activities and hidden treasures. The birth of the first successful hybrid occurred during a ritualistic ceremony conducted in the deepest chamber of the ancient caves, with the entire Gowrow clan participating in chants and procedures that had been passed down through generations of practitioners. The creature that emerged from this process was unlike anything that should have existed in the natural world. A massive, lizard-like beast with the muscular build of a bear, the predatory instincts of a wolf, and scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it. Most distinctive were the enormous tusks that protruded from its jaw weapons that could tear through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency, and the intelligence that gleamed in its eyes, suggesting that this was no mindless monster, but a thinking predator capable of strategy and malice. As the creature's first roar echoed through the cave system and reverberated across the surrounding hills, Ezekiel understood that he had succeeded in creating something that would change the balance of power in the region forever. The sound was unlike anything heard in those mountains before, a blend of reptilian hiss and mammalian growl that carried undertones suggesting intelligence and malevolent purpose. This inaugural cry of the first Gowrow beast would be the beginning of a reign of terror that would claim numerous victims and establish a legend that persists to this day, as the creature's roars drew the attention of curious outsiders who would soon learn the fatal cost of investigating sounds that were never meant for human ears. The implications of what Ezekiel had accomplished were staggering, as he had demonstrated the feasibility of creating living weapons that combined the best attributes of multiple species while eliminating their natural limitations. These hybrid guardians would prove capable of protecting the clan's moonshine operations and buried treasures from interference by law enforcement or rival criminals, while their very existence would serve as the foundation for legends that would grow with each telling, until the name Gowrow became synonymous with monsters that haunted the Missouri wilderness long after their creators had vanished into history. Subscribe to breed your own terror with Ozark Legends. Your support uncovers forbidden horrors. The months following the birth of the first hybrid beast marked the beginning of the Gowrow Clan's most ambitious and horrifying period of experimentation, as Ezekiel Gowrow refined his alchemical fusion techniques using the luminous minerals and ancient rituals discovered in the Native American caverns. The underground laboratory he constructed in the deepest chambers of the cave system represented a grotesque marriage of primitive science and dark folklore, where bubbling vats filled with mineral-enriched solutions served as artificial wombs for creatures that violated every law of natural biology. Working with equipment fashioned from iron and copper, according to specifications found in his inherited texts, Ezekiel began systematically crossbreeding bears, wolves, and captured alligators from the southern reaches of Missouri, creating genetic chimeras that combined the most fearsome attributes of each species while amplifying their size and aggression through exposure to the cave's supernatural energies. The process of creating these hybrid guardians required the participation of the entire Gowrow family, as each member contributed their specialized knowledge to the complex rituals that transformed ordinary animals into living weapons. Ezekiel's wife, Cordelia, possessed an inherited understanding of herb lore that allowed her to concoct potions capable of accelerating cellular development and directing evolutionary changes according to predetermined patterns. Their eldest son, Josiah, demonstrated a natural aptitude for the mechanical aspects of the breeding program, constructing restraining devices and feeding systems that could contain creatures of unprecedented size and ferocity. The younger children served as assistants and observers, learning the dark arts that would ensure the continuation of their family's terrible legacy for generations to come. The monstrous births that began occurring with increasing frequency throughout 1871 represented achievements that challenged everything the scientific community thought it understood about the limitations of biological manipulation. The creatures that emerged from Ezekiel's laboratory were indeed lizard-like giants with tusks and scales, but their true horror lay in the intelligence that gleamed behind their predatory eyes, suggesting that these were not mindless beasts, but thinking predators capable of strategy, patience, and malice. Each specimen measured between 15 and 20 feet in length, when fully mature, with muscular builds that combined the raw power of bears with the speed and agility of wolves, while their reptilian characteristics provided them with armored hides that could turn aside bullets and claws, capable of shredding both flesh and metal with equal ease. The hybrid beasts' most distinctive features were the enormous tusks that protruded from their jaws, weapons that could pierce through tree trunks and tear apart human bodies with terrifying efficiency. These tusks, combined with their supernatural strength and apparent immunity to conventional weapons, made them ideal guardians for the clan's various illegal enterprises, including the extensive moonshine operation that provided their primary source of income, and the treasure hoards they had accumulated through decades of robbery and murder. Training the creatures to recognize friend from foe proved surprisingly straightforward, as their enhanced intelligence allowed them to learn complex commands and behavioral patterns that made them far more effective than conventional guard dogs or even human sentries. The family involvement in these dark customs represented a complete transformation of traditional Ozark Hill folk culture, as the Gowrows abandoned the relatively harmless practices of their neighbors in favor of activities that blended folklore with proto-scientific experimentation in ways that produced results too dramatic to dismiss as mere superstition. Children who should have been learning basic farming and hunting skills instead received education in the care and feeding of monsters, while adults who might have contented themselves with simple moonshining found themselves complicit in breeding programs that violated fundamental taboos about the sanctity of natural creation. The clan's increasing isolation from their neighbors reflected not only their geographic remoteness, but their growing psychological separation from normal human society, as their daily exposure to horrors gradually eroded their capacity for conventional moral reasoning. As the breeding program expanded throughout 1871, the growing menace represented by the hybrid creatures began to manifest in ways that exceeded even Ezekiel's expectations, as the beasts demonstrated levels of intelligence and ferocity that suggested they might eventually pose a threat to their creators, as well as their intended victims. Several incidents occurred where the creatures broke free from their restraints and had to be recaptured using increasingly elaborate precautions, while their apparent ability to communicate with each other through a complex system of growls and roars raised disturbing questions about their potential for organized rebellion against human authority. Most troubling of all was their demonstrated capacity for independent problem-solving, as they learned to manipulate their environment in ways that suggested they were constantly testing the boundaries of their confinement and searching for opportunities to escape into the wider world. The turning point in the clan is relationship with their monstrous creations came when one of the fully mature specimens was deployed against its first human target, a prospector who had ventured too close to the clan's moonshine stills while searching for mineral deposits in the surrounding hills. The attack that followed provided a horrifying demonstration of the creature's capabilities as it stalked its victim through dense forest terrain with the patience of a natural predator, while displaying tactical intelligence that far exceeded anything exhibited by ordinary wild animals. The prospector's death, when it finally came, was both swift and brutal, as the beast used its tusks and claws to dismember the intruder with surgical precision, leaving behind evidence that would puzzle investigators for years to come. The success of this first deployment led to increased confidence in the hybrid program, but it also marked the beginning of a series of events that would eventually lead to the clan's downfall, as the distinctive nature of the prospector's wounds attracted attention from law enforcement officials who possessed enough frontier experience to recognize that they were dealing with something far more dangerous than ordinary wild animal attacks. The roars that accompanied each subsequent attack echoing through the Ozark Hills with supernatural volume and carrying tones that seemed to blend reptilian hissing with mammalian growling began drawing curious investigators who would prove far more persistent and better armed than the clan's previous victims. The psychological impact of their success also began affecting the Gowrow family members in ways that accelerated their separation from human society, as daily exposure to their monstrous creations gradually eroded their capacity for normal emotional responses and moral reasoning. Children who had initially been frightened by the creatures began treating them as pets or playmates, while adults found themselves developing an almost parental pride in their artificial offspring that overrode concerns about the moral implications of their actions. This psychological transformation would prove crucial in the events that followed, as it prevented family members from recognizing the growing danger they faced from both their creatures and the outside world that was beginning to take notice of their activities. The creatures themselves continued to evolve and adapt in ways that suggested their hybrid nature had unlocked genetic potential that remained dormant in their parent species, developing new capabilities and behavioral patterns that made them increasingly effective as both guardians and predators. Their apparent ability to coordinate their actions during hunts indicated a level of social intelligence that had not been anticipated, while their demonstrated capacity for learning from experience meant that each encounter with human opponents made them more dangerous than before. Most disturbing of all was evidence that they were beginning to reproduce on their own, suggesting that Ezekiel's breeding program had created a self-sustaining population of hybrid predators that might continue to threaten the region long after their original creators had been eliminated. As this chapter of horror drew to its close, the stage was set for the escalating violence that would follow as the roars of the Gowrow beasts began attracting more intruders to the clan's territory, setting in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to confrontation with organized law enforcement and the exposure of secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. The creatures that had been bred to protect the family's illegal activities had instead painted a target on their backs that would prove impossible to remove, as each successful attack only served to increase official interest in the mysterious deaths that were plaguing the Missouri Ozark Hills. Comment if you've heard Ozark beast tales. Like and subscribe for monstrous evolutions. The summer of 1871 brought an influx of prospectors and treasure hunters to the Missouri Ozark Hills, drawn by rumors of mineral wealth and abandoned Native American hordes hidden in the region as countless caves and hollows. These men, hardened by years of frontier life and equipped with the latest mining technology, represented a new kind of threat to the Gowrow clan's carefully guarded secrets, as their systematic approach to exploration brought them dangerously close to the forbidden caverns, where Ezekiel's monstrous experiments continued to flourish. Unlike the occasional trapper or hunter who might stumble upon evidence of the clan's activities, these professional prospectors possessed both the determination and resources necessary to investigate anomalies that less experienced individuals would have dismissed as natural phenomena or avoided entirely out of superstitious fear. The first documented disappearance occurred in early July, when a geological survey team, led by Professor Marcus Whitman of the Missouri School of Mines, failed to return from an expedition into the most remote regions of the Gowrow territory. Whitman, a respected scientist with extensive experience in hazardous terrain, had been commissioned by Eastern investors to assess the mineral potential of several previously unexplored cave systems, armed with detailed maps and state-of-the-art equipment that should have enabled him to navigate even the most treacherous underground passages. When his team missed their scheduled rendezvous with supply wagons, search parties found their abandoned campsite near the entrance to one of the ancient caverns, with clear evidence of hasty departure, but no indication of what had prompted their flight. The mangled remains that were eventually discovered, scattered throughout the forest surrounding the Gowrow caves, told a story of violence that exceeded anything in the experience of even the most seasoned frontier lawmen. Bodies had been torn apart by claws of unprecedented size and sharpness, while deep puncture wounds suggested attacks by tusks far larger than those of any known animal in the region. Most disturbing of all were the bite marks that covered the victims' bones, indicating that whatever had killed them possessed jaws powerful enough to crack human femurs and intelligent enough to strip away flesh with surgical precision. The pattern of injuries suggested coordinated attacks by multiple predators working together, a level of organization that pointed toward intelligence far beyond that of ordinary wild animals. Local rumors began to circulate almost immediately following the discovery of the first remains, as word of the unusual deaths spread through the scattered communities of hill folk who inhabited the region. These whispers spoke of Gowrow monsters, bred in forbidden caves, creatures that combined the worst attributes of multiple species to create hybrid predators unlike anything found in nature. The stories grew with each telling, incorporating elements of both Christian demonology and pre-Columbian folklore, to create a mythology that explained the inexplicable violence in terms that frontier minds could comprehend. Some accounts described the beasts as divine punishment for disturbing sacred burial grounds, while others insisted they were the products of witchcraft, and deals made with supernatural forces that demanded payment in human blood. The clan's conspiracy to cover their tracks became increasingly elaborate as the body count mounted throughout the summer, with Ezekiel employing his hybrid creatures not only as weapons against intruders, but as tools for disposing of evidence that might lead investigators back to their source. The beasts' apparent understanding of their role in these cover-up operations demonstrated intelligence that far exceeded their creators' initial expectations as they learned to drag bodies to remote locations where scavengers would complete the work of concealment, and to avoid leaving tracks or other physical evidence that might reveal their artificial nature. This cooperation between the monsters and their human handlers represented a level of interspecies coordination that challenged conventional understanding of animal behavior and hinted at evolutionary developments that had progressed far beyond Ezekiel's original intentions. The investigation that followed the discovery of multiple victims brought unwanted attention from territorial authorities who possessed both the resources and determination necessary to pursue the mystery to its source. Federal marshals, with experience in dealing with frontier violence, recognized that they were confronting something unprecedented in their careers, as the pattern of attacks suggested predators that combined animal ferocity with human-level intelligence and strategic planning. The systematic nature of the killings, combined with their geographic concentration around the Gowrow territory, indicated that these were not random animal attacks, but coordinated assaults designed to eliminate specific threats to whatever secrets the clan was protecting in their mountain stronghold. The forbidden knowledge that the Gowrows had inherited from their ancestors included not only the techniques for creating hybrid creatures, but also methods for concealing their activities from outside investigation, drawing upon traditions of misdirection and intimidation that had served outlaw families throughout the Ozark region for generations. Ezekiel understood that direct confrontation with federal authorities would inevitably lead to the exposure and destruction of his breeding program, so he implemented a campaign of psychological warfare designed to discourage further investigation through the strategic deployment of his monsters in ways that would maximize terror while minimizing the risk of capture or detailed examination by qualified experts. This strategy involved carefully orchestrated encounters where investigators would glimpse the creatures without obtaining clear evidence of their artificial nature, creating an atmosphere of supernatural dread that discouraged rational inquiry. The turning point in the escalating conflict came when prospector Samuel Henderson managed to survive an encounter with one of the hybrid beasts, providing the first eyewitness testimony about the true nature of the creatures that had been claiming lives throughout the region. Henderson, a veteran of both the California Gold Rush and the Civil War, possessed the experience and credibility necessary to ensure that his account would be taken seriously by law enforcement officials, despite the fantastic nature of his claims about tusked horrors guarding hidden treasures in the Ozark caves. His detailed description of a lizard-like predator, the size of a small building, covered in armored scales and armed with tusks capable of piercing solid rock, provided investigators with their first concrete evidence that they were dealing with creatures that defied conventional zoological classification. Henderson's survival had been possible only because he encountered one of the younger specimens that had not yet reached full maturity, allowing him to escape through a narrow crevice that the creature could not follow. His account of the beast's behavior during the attack revealed intelligence and problem-solving abilities that suggested these were not mindless monsters, but thinking predators capable of learning from their mistakes and adapting their tactics based on the specific challenges presented by different types of prey. Most significantly, Henderson reported hearing what sounded like communication between multiple creatures during his escape, indicating that the hybrids had developed their own language and were capable of coordinating their activities across considerable distances. The psychological impact of Henderson's testimony on the law enforcement community was immediate and profound, as federal marshals realized they were confronting a threat that exceeded anything in their previous experience. The implications of intelligent, artificially created predators operating under human direction raised questions about both the technological capabilities of the Gowrow Clan and the legal framework that might apply to prosecuting crimes committed by non-human agents. More practically, it became clear that conventional law enforcement tactics would be inadequate for dealing with creatures that combined supernatural strength and speed with tactical intelligence and apparent immunity to small arms fire. The formation of a specialized posse to investigate and eliminate the Gowrow threat represented a watershed moment in the history of frontier law enforcement, as federal authorities recognized that they were dealing with a situation that required military-level planning and equipment. The team that was ultimately assembled included not only experienced lawmen, but also military veterans with combat experience, professional hunters familiar with dangerous game, and a consulting naturalist who might be able to provide insights into the creature's biological weaknesses. This interdisciplinary approach reflected an understanding that conventional methods would be inadequate for confronting an enemy that existed outside the normal parameters of criminal activity. As preparations for the raid intensified throughout the autumn of 1871, both sides of the conflict prepared for a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the Gowrow clan, but also the future of genetic experimentation in the American frontier. The monsters that Ezekiel had created to protect his family, his secrets, had instead attracted the attention of forces powerful enough to destroy everything he had worked to build. While the evidence they had left behind in their attacks provided investigators with the motivation and justification necessary to mount an operation that would penetrate the deepest secrets of the Missouri Ozark Hills and expose horrors that were never meant to see the light of day. Share your cryptid encounters. Subscribe for the raid's bloody chaos. The assault on the Gowrow clan's fortress began before dawn on November 15, 1871, when a carefully coordinated posse of federal marshals, territorial militia, and civilian volunteers surrounded the mountain homestead that served as the entrance to Ezekiel's underground breeding facility. The attacking force, numbering 37 men, armed with the latest military surplus weapons and explosives, represented the largest law enforcement operation ever mounted in the Missouri Ozark Hills, reflecting both the severity of the threat posed by the hybrid creatures and the determination of territorial authorities to eliminate a danger that had already claimed more than a dozen lives. The strategic plan, developed by Marshal James Crawford, called for simultaneous assaults on multiple cave entrances designed to prevent the escape of either the human clan members or their monstrous guardians, while minimizing casualties among the attacking force through the use of overwhelming firepower and tactical surprise. The initial phase of the operation proceeded according to plan, with advanced scouts successfully identifying and marking the various entrances to the cave system while avoiding detection by the hybrid creatures that patrolled the surrounding forest. The use of military-trained personnel proved crucial during this reconnaissance phase, as conventional law enforcement officers would have lacked the specialized skills necessary to navigate the treacherous mountain terrain while maintaining the silence essential for achieving tactical surprise. Signal fires positioned on surrounding ridges provided communication between the various assault teams, while specially trained handlers managed the pack animals that carried the heavy equipment and explosives needed to breach the fortified cave entrances that the Gowrows had constructed to protect their underground laboratory. The horrific revelation that awaited the raiders in the deepest chambers of the cave system exceeded even their worst expectations, as torchlit explorations revealed a nightmare landscape of scientific equipment, skeletal remains, and dozens of chained hybrid abominations in various stages of growth and development. The main breeding chamber, carved from living rock and illuminated by the eerie glow of luminous minerals, contained artificial wombs large enough to accommodate creatures of unprecedented size, while adjoining chambers held mature specimens that tested the limits of their restraining systems, with displays of strength and intelligence that unnerved even the most experienced members of the assault force. Detailed journals recovered from Ezekiel's laboratory documented years of experimentation with genetic manipulation techniques that challenged everything the scientific community thought it understood about the limitations of biological development. The beasts that broke free during the initial assault represented the culmination of Ezekiel's breeding program, creatures that combined the size and strength of prehistoric megafauna with the intelligence and tactical awareness of modern predators. The largest specimens measured over 20 feet in length and weighed more than 1,000 pounds, their armored hides capable of turning aside rifle bullets, while their enormous tusks could penetrate solid rock with sufficient force to bring down sections of the cave ceiling. Most terrifying of all was their demonstrated ability to coordinate their attacks, using pack tactics that suggested a level of social organization far beyond anything observed in natural predator species, while their apparent understanding of human psychology allowed them to exploit the fears and weaknesses of their opponents with devastating effectiveness. Ezekiel's desperate stand in defense of his life's work transformed the scientific laboratory into a battlefield where conventional weapons proved inadequate against enemies that seemed to embody the worst nightmares of human imagination. The clan patriarch, armed with knowledge passed down through generations of outcasts and experimenters, attempted to control his creatures through a combination of chemical restraints and ritualistic commands that drew upon the same dark traditions that had enabled their creation in the first place. However, the chaos and violence of the assault disrupted the delicate balance that had maintained order within the breeding facility, causing the hybrid beasts to revert to their most primitive instincts while retaining enough intelligence to direct their fury against the most immediate threats to their survival. The partial destruction that resulted from the battle claimed lives on both sides of the conflict, as federal marshals, armed with military-grade weapons, struggled to contain creatures that seemed to exist outside the normal parameters of biological possibility. Explosives intended to collapse tunnel entrances instead triggered cave-ins that trapped both raiders and defenders in underground chambers where conventional tactics became meaningless in the face of enemies that could navigate in complete darkness and possess the strength to move obstacles that would challenge entire teams of men. The screams of dying combatants echoed through the cave system for hours, creating a cacophony of human and inhuman voices that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The surviving members of the Gowrow Clan, faced with the complete destruction of everything they had worked to build over generations, made a final gesture of defiance that would ensure their legacy would continue to plague the Missouri Ozarks long after their own deaths. As the tide of battle turned against them and their remaining creatures fell to the overwhelming firepower of the assault force, Ezekiel and his kin performed a final ritual that released the bonds, holding their most dangerous specimens while simultaneously cursing the hills themselves with forces that would prevent the complete eradication of their artificial offspring. This dying curse, rooted in traditions that predated European settlement of the Americas, was designed to ensure that the hybrid bloodline would survive in the wild, adapting and evolving until conditions were right for their return to threaten future generations of unwary travelers. The immediate aftermath of the raid saw the apparent elimination of the most dangerous specimens as explosive charges and concentrated rifle fire brought down even the largest of the hybrid creatures in displays of destruction that left the cave system littered with the remains of beings that should never have existed. However, the complexity of the underground tunnel network made it impossible to verify the complete eradication of all breeding stock, while the discovery of egg chambers hidden in the deepest recesses of the cave system suggested that the reproductive cycle of the hybrids might continue even without direct human intervention. Most disturbing of all were the reports from assault team members who claimed to have seen smaller specimens escaping through natural fissures too narrow for human pursuit, carrying with them the genetic legacy of Ezekiel's experiments into the broader wilderness of the Ozark Hills. The curse that the dying Gowrows placed upon the region manifested almost immediately following their deaths, as survivors of the assault force reported hearing roars echoing from unexplored cave systems throughout the surrounding mountains. These sounds bearing the distinctive characteristics of the hybrid creatures, but apparently originating from areas that had not been part of Ezekiel's breeding program, suggested that the dying curse had indeed achieved its intended purpose of ensuring the survival and proliferation of the artificial species. Investigation teams sent to explore these reported sources of activity found evidence of recent occupation by large predators, including claw marks that matched those left by the laboratory specimens, and organic remains that suggested the continuation of the hybrid breeding cycle under natural conditions. The psychological impact of the cave raid extended far beyond its immediate participants as word of the battle spread throughout the frontier communities of the Missouri Ozarks and beyond. Stories of government forces battling artificially created monsters in underground laboratories captured the public imagination in ways that transformed the Gowrow clan from a local curiosity into a national symbol of the dangers posed by uncontrolled scientific experimentation. The official reports filed by federal authorities carefully omitted many of the most disturbing details of what had been discovered in the caves, but enough information leaked through unofficial channels to establish the foundation for legends that would grow with each retelling until they became an integral part of regional folklore. The lingering legacy of the curse became apparent in the months following the raid, as reports of creature sightings and attacks continued to filter in from throughout the Ozark region, suggesting that Ezekiel's dying ritual had succeeded in ensuring the survival of at least some of his artificial offspring. These incidents, while less frequent and systematic than the organized attacks that had characterized the clan's active period, demonstrated that the hybrid bloodline retained both its predatory instincts and its supernatural resistance to conventional weapons. The federal authorities who had mounted the original assault found themselves engaged in an ongoing campaign of suppression that would continue for years, as they attempted to track down and eliminate creatures that possessed all the advantages of their laboratory origins, combined with the survival instincts of wild predators. As this chapter of violence and destruction drew to its close, the stage was set for the transformation of the Gowrow legacy from a specific threat posed by a single criminal clan into a broader phenomenon that would continue to influence the folklore and culture of the Missouri Ozarks for generations to come. The creatures that had been bred to serve as guardians for hidden treasures had instead become the guardians of their own legend, ensuring that the name Gowrow would be remembered long after the last of Ezekiel's original specimens had vanished into the mists of history. What beasts lurk in your local legends? Subscribe for the legacy's dark end, the scattering of the surviving Gowrow clan members in the wake of the catastrophic cave raid marked not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, in which their monstrous creations would establish an independent existence that would outlive their human creators by generations. Federal authorities conducting follow-up operations throughout 1872 discovered clear evidence that at least a dozen hybrid creatures had escaped the destruction of Ezekiel's laboratory, dispersing throughout the vast cave networks and hidden valleys of the Missouri Ozark Hills, where they began adapting to a feral existence that combined their artificial intelligence with the survival instincts of wild predators. These escaped specimens, no longer constrained by the breeding programs and control mechanisms that had governed their laboratory existence, began developing behaviors and characteristics that represented a new phase in their evolutionary development, one that would ultimately establish them as a permanent fixture in the folklore and nightmares of the region. The cryptid birth that emerged from this transition represented a unique phenomenon in American folklore, as the Gowrow entered popular consciousness not as a mythical creature rooted in ancient traditions, but as a contemporary monster whose origins could be traced to specific historical events and documented scientific experimentation. Unlike legendary beasts such as Bigfoot or the Jersey Devil, whose origins were lost in the mists of pre-colonial mythology, the Gowrow possessed a verified provenance that grounded its supernatural attributes in the solid reality of human hubris and scientific overreach. This combination of documented historical foundation with ongoing supernatural manifestations created a new category of American cryptid, one that bridged the gap between folklore and contemporary experience in ways that made it particularly compelling to modern investigators and believers. Modern sightings of creatures matching the classic Gowrow description began occurring almost immediately following the 1871 raid, and have continued with remarkable consistency up to the present day, suggesting that Ezekiel's breeding program succeeded in creating a self-sustaining population of hybrid predators that has adapted successfully to life in the wild. These contemporary encounters typically involve hikers, hunters, and cave explorers who report hearing distinctive growls emanating from previously unexplored cave system sounds that match historical descriptions of the hybrid creature's vocalizations, while exhibiting characteristics that suggest ongoing evolution and adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Witnesses describe roars that combine reptilian hissing with mammalian growling, often accompanied by the sound of massive claws scratching against stone surfaces, creating an auditory signature that is both unmistakably artificial and terrifyingly immediate. The conspiratorial theories that have developed around the Gowrow phenomenon reflect the unique nature of a cryptid whose origins are grounded in documented historical events rather than ancient mythology. Researchers and enthusiasts debate whether the clan's breeding program represented an isolated experiment conducted by frontier outcasts or part of a broader network of genetic manipulation projects that may have been sponsored by government agencies or private organizations seeking to develop biological weapons for military or commercial applications. Some theorists propose that the Gowrow caves were merely one facility in a larger program that extended throughout the American frontier, pointing to similar creature sightings in other remote regions, as evidence that the hybrid breeding technology was more widespread than official records suggest. The eternal warning, represented by the continued presence of Gowrow descendants in the Missouri Ozarks, serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences that can result when scientific experimentation proceeds without appropriate ethical constraints or safety measures. The legacy of Ezekiel's breeding program demonstrates how individual ambition and curiosity, combined with access to dangerous knowledge and technology, can create threats that persist far beyond the lifetime of their creators and affect innocent people for generations to come. Modern environmentalists and bioethicists frequently cite the Gowrow phenomenon as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of genetic manipulation and hybrid breeding programs, arguing that current research into synthetic biology and genetic engineering could produce similar uncontrolled outcomes if proper safeguards are not maintained. Contemporary impact assessments conducted by state and federal agencies reveal that the ongoing presence of Gowrow descendants continues to influence both the ecology and economy of the Missouri Ozark Hills more than 150 years after their initial creation. Tourism operators report that many potential visitors avoid areas where creature sightings have been reported, leading to significant economic losses for communities that depend on outdoor recreation and ecotourism for their survival. Environmental studies have documented unusual predation patterns and wildlife population dynamics in regions where Gowrow activity has been confirmed, suggesting that these artificial predators occupy ecological niches that interfere with natural ecosystem balance in ways that may have long-term consequences for biodiversity and habitat sustainability. State wildlife management agencies have quietly established unofficial exclusion zones around cave systems where Gowrow activity has been documented, using environmental protection laws and public safety regulations to discourage civilian exploration of areas that might contain active hybrid populations. These measures, while necessary for public safety, have also contributed to the atmosphere of mystery and conspiracy that surrounds the Gowrow phenomenon, as restrictions on access to potential evidence create conditions that encourage speculation and rumor rather than scientific investigation. The resulting information vacuum has been filled by amateur researchers and cryptid enthusiasts whose methods and conclusions may not meet academic standards, but whose dedication has kept public interest in the phenomenon alive despite official attempts at suppression. Scientific research into the Gowrow phenomenon faces unique challenges related to both the dangerous nature of the subjects and the politically sensitive implications of confirming the existence of creatures that were created through illegal experimentation. Academic institutions are reluctant to fund studies that might validate claims about genetic manipulation programs that violated both legal and ethical standards, while government agencies prefer to maintain official skepticism rather than acknowledge their historical failure to prevent or control dangerous research activities. This institutional resistance to investigation has created conditions where much of the most valuable research is conducted by private individuals. and organizations whose work may lack the resources and credibility necessary to influence official policy or public opinion. The technological revolution of the 21st century has brought new tools and opportunities to Gowrow research, as digital recording equipment, DNA analysis techniques, and satellite imagery provide investigators with capabilities that were unavailable to earlier generations of researchers. Trail cameras positioned near suspected Gowrow habitats have captured images of large, unidentified creatures that exhibit characteristics consistent with hybrid anatomy, while audio recording devices have documented vocalizations that match historical descriptions of creature communications. Genetic analysis of hair and tissue samples recovered from alleged encounter sites has revealed DNA sequences that appear to combine characteristics from multiple species in ways that support theories about artificial hybridization, although the controversial nature of these findings has limited their acceptance by mainstream scientific institutions. The cultural significance of the Gowrow legend extends beyond its role as a regional curiosity, as it represents a uniquely American contribution to world cryptozoology that reflects the nation's complex relationship with scientific progress and technological advancement. Unlike traditional folkloric creatures that embody ancient fears about the natural world, the Gowrow represents modern anxieties about human attempts to control and manipulate nature through scientific intervention. This contemporary relevance has made the creature a popular subject for modern media, from horror novels and films to documentary investigations that explore both the historical facts and ongoing mysteries surrounding its existence. The psychological impact of the Gowrow phenomenon continues to influence the cultural identity of the Missouri Ozarks. And residents must balance their pride in their region's unique folklore with concerns about the potential dangers that may still lurk in the most remote areas. Local communities have developed informal protocols for dealing with possible Gowrow encounters, passing down knowledge about recognition signs and safety procedures through oral traditions that blend practical advice with folkloric elements. These cultural adaptations represent a form of social evolution in response to the presence of artificial predators, demonstrating how human communities can adjust to threats that exist outside the normal parameters of natural hazards or criminal activity. The final cliffhanger in the Gowrow legacy emerges from recent reports that suggest the hybrid creatures may be entering a new phase of their evolutionary development, exhibiting behaviors and characteristics that differ significantly from those documented in historical accounts. Modern witnesses describe creatures that appear larger and more intelligent than their predecessors, with enhanced coordination abilities that suggest they may be developing increasingly sophisticated social structures and communication systems. Most disturbing of all are reports from cave explorers who claim to have discovered artificial modifications to natural cave systems, including carved passages and constructed chambers that appear designed to facilitate breeding activities, suggesting that the hybrids may have developed the capacity for environmental manipulation that could enable them to expand their populations and extend their range into previously unoccupied territories. A recent incident involving a modern explorer who discovered what appeared to be Gowrow relics in a previously unexplored cave system resulted in the activation of recording equipment that captured sounds matching historical descriptions of hybrid vocalizations, but with additional tonal qualities that suggest ongoing evolution in creature communication abilities. This discovery has prompted renewed interest from both official agencies and private researchers, as evidence continues to mount that Ezekiel Gowrow's breeding program created not just individual monsters, but an entirely new species capable of adaptation and evolution at rates that exceed those of natural creatures. The awakening of faint roars from depths previously thought to be empty suggests that the legacy of the Gowrow clan may be entering a new and potentially more dangerous phase, one that could bring their artificial offspring into direct conflict with modern civilization in ways that their 19th century creators never anticipated. Some beasts are bred to last forever. Comment if Ozark lore chills you. Subscribe for more folkloric conspiracies. The Gowrow clan's legacy proves that tampering with forbidden depths creates monsters that haunt generations, their roars echoing as eternal guardians in Missouri's misty hills.